So we are a minute past the hour. Welcome, everybody, both our esteemed HPE partners, our HPE pre-sales, our esteemed colleagues from Qumulo, and everybody. So you are here at the HPE Greenlake with Qumulo a webinar with a specific use case on the video surveillance storage as a service. I would like to introduce our speakers from HPE Greenlake, the worldwide go-to-market sales lead, Scott Thompson, and our technology evangelist who specializes in our expert in VSS, Michael Cade. I would like to direct also the folks to, if you look down in your Zoom, to the Q&A for any questions and any technical questions, any details during the webinar. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A. Myself, Anna Tenatarm, the EMEA Channel Architect, and Berat Ulualan are here to answer all your questions as our experts go through and walk you through the HPE Greenlake and the Qumulo video surveillance story. So with that all being said, thank you so much for your time, and I pass it on to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Anna. And if we could just move forward one slide. I'm going to start and introduce things a little bit before we move on to Michael to talk more specifically around video surveillance. But fundamentally, what underpins the reason why we decided to have this webinar today is really to talk about this key use case in the context of the Greenlake and Qumulo partnership. And you know, that's bringing the very best of what Qumulo offers in terms of its modern hybrid file system, and an HPE Greenlake, of course, which is something I'm just going to touch on a little bit as we go through the coming slides. But where we'll get to is a point where you can understand that you can have all the benefits of Qumulo now on an HPE platform within the Greenlake Cloud Services model, and consume that under one contract and one service experience on a monthly consumption-based invoice. So we just move forward. I'll set the scene by highlighting the market that we find ourselves in, and what we see is really the next wave of digital transformation. So the last dozen years or so have been really underpinned by the proliferation of movement of apps and data to the public cloud, wherever possible. But here we are now, still a dozen or so years later, with 70% of apps and data remaining outside the public cloud. And there's very good reasons for that. So, you know, latency, compliance, security, data gravity are all key reasons why people can't access the public cloud for all their apps and data. What we also see, though, is that 95, 96, I think the number is, of people using the public cloud like the experience, or happy with the experience of public cloud, because it does give them that speed and agility. So what we're seeing is a situation where, yeah, we've got a lot of apps and data remaining on premise, but we'd like them to be within that public cloud experience and can't get there. So if we move forward a slide, we can show how HPE are addressing that with our Greenlake model, which is described as the cloud that comes to you, and that is literally what we're doing. We've created Greenlake, which is a cloud model, just not a public cloud model. And we work with our public cloud partners in AWS, GCP, Azure, absolutely. But for those apps and data that need that control level and insight level from an on-premise experience, we're delivering those key factors that make the public cloud so appealing. And that's self-service, pay-per-use, the flexibility to scale up and scale down as needed, and having it managed for you. One of those key benefits of public cloud experiences, or a cloud experience, is about having that managed for you and taking that burden off you, allowing you, the customer, to focus on your business outcomes. And you'll see in the middle, I'm not referring to it as your data center. I'm talking about a location optimized data center from the perspective that we actually embed data center services as part of GreenLake contracts often. It can land in your data center, it doesn't have to. We leverage partnerships with likes of Equinix and CyrusOne as co-location providers to allow us to land that cloud experience wherever you need it to be. So if we move forward another slide, that would be fantastic. So think of the HPE that you're familiar with, and previous to HPE, Hewlett Packard, even going back the years, we'd be a company that are, very famous for high quality servers, storage, networking services, as you'd expect. This that you're looking at in front of you is the way that we view our portfolio now. It's a a suite of solutions, services that are based on what we see our customers needing, whether that is simple infrastructure as a service for compute, storage, networking, or whether that's moving into a specific platform, be that container platform or SAP, for example, or whether it's a specific workload you're looking to manage, like VDI or big data, as really is quite aligned to the subject that we're going to talk about today in more detail. So if we move forward another slide, we can talk about how the partnership between HPE GreenLake and Qumulo really allows us to deliver on on this video surveillance play, but also other plays that we're working on. So from an HPE side, this GreenLake service is delivering operational efficiency in a cloud experience. Well, the way that we do that is we deliver a instead of delivering infrastructure, we're delivering now the service consumed as and when you need to, and landing wherever you need it to go. So it's pay as you go, and you can see that return on investment and align the costs to the outcomes, and having that simplicity of not having to manage the infrastructure. And even we can run and monitor as well if you so choose, and it's all underpinned by that best of breed technology that we're famous for. But equally, we're bringing into that the modern hybrid cloud file storage of Qumulo and the benefits that that brings, eliminating data blindness and bringing into that single service experience through your point of contact with HPE. Those enviable NPS scores and Gartner peer insights that Qumulo bring to the table to help us deliver that service experience to you. Um, and I think the challenge that we see this addressing for our customers is really illustrated on the next slide quite well. Because what we're seeing is, this growth of unstructured data. In fact, when we look at the data growth in the market in general, we can see that, it's a massive explosion overall. And from my understanding, around 80% of that is unstructured data. But customers are seeing that growing and looking to be able to manage that with a cloud-like experience. But like we touched on earlier, maybe don't have the ability to move those workloads. Thinking about video surveillance storage, maybe there's a lot of analytics to be done to that, and collaboration to be done on those files, that mean that it would be costly to have those egress charges constantly from working in a public cloud environment. But also they want to eliminate data blindness. And that's where we bring this partnership of GreenLake Cloud Services and Qumulo together to give the cloud-like experience and the removal of data blindness on unstructured data. So that's really pulling through a lot of the benefits of HPE GreenLake and extending them into the Qumulo file system. If we move to the next slide, we can see some of that illustrated as I look to demonstrate that this pay-as-you-go, no upfront capital outlay that sees our customers make savings of around 30 to 40% typically, because we know in a standard storage environment, customers, according to 451 research, tend to over provision by approaching 50% of what they actually need today. So having pay as you go and aligning that cost to outcome is huge. We talked already a little bit about our co-location facilities, again, now extending to your ability to work with us with Qumulo on that and have the burden of data center management gone. and having that high performance file platform with the faster time to value critical. So these are some of the key benefits that we can get from partnering. And that works across a number of use cases that we can see on the next slide. But the one we're going to, as you can see, there's a wide array from general purpose file across to more analytical workloads, and then rich media and video. And that's where we're going to focus in today, looking particularly at video surveillance. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more on the how of Greenlake towards the end of the presentation. But I'd like to move on now to Michael and introduce Michael to cover video surveillance for us. Tell us a bit more about modern file system in video surveillance.
Thank you very much, Scott. Before we start, though, with video surveillance and Qumulo in itself, I need to talk a little bit about what I feel are the minimum requirements for modern video surveillance. Let's just be realistic. Video surveillance protects property and people, and that's really what it's all about. And we feel very strongly that it must be fault tolerant, and you should never lose any video. The legal requirements nowadays of losing video when you're protecting people specifically is so high that it's not even worth discussing. We believe that the storage for video surveillance should be extremely easy to manage and scale, because ultimately we're always referring back to bullet point 2. It should be fault tolerant. And because of that, there should be no disruptions in your storage architecture, your video surveillance architecture, because of hardware or software failures. You should have built in the idea that everything needs to be redundant in some way. That doesn't mean that you buy 2 of everything. It just means that you need to make smart decisions so that fault tolerance is a priority, because again, you're protecting people. Property, if someone steals something, maybe you're not as concerned about someone walking to a shop and walking out, but certainly if you're Tiffany's, you are. But people, you're certainly worried about, people being assaulted in the parking lot, or accidents occurring on freeways. And in the United States, as much as I hate to admit this, random shootings occurring, right? So you have to worry about things like that and the legal requirements of being able to protect people. And storage should be able to accommodate the changing camera needs. If I size video surveillance today for a 1080p camera with a retention time of 7 days and say 15 frames per second, what happens if I change any of that? Am I covered, and can I continue to use my video surveillance while I make those changes, or am I causing a disruption because I've sized it just for what I originally provisioned for? And so understanding what the cameras can do to you, et cetera, is very important when you size something, unless you take into account that your storage can grow with you. So for instance, storage is driven by cameras. Let's just be realistic. If I buy a 720p camera, a 1080p camera, or 4K camera, the amount of data it generates changes based upon the resolution, the frame rates, the scene complexity, and the retention time. And I'll talk a little bit about all of those. Also, AI is becoming more and more important. Do you have storage and hardware infrastructure, servers specifically, so that you can do modern day AI with video surveillance? This is also quite important. So for instance, when I'm looking at the resolution of a camera, any security officer can look at any one of those 3 pictures and probably identify the license plate and the person. But modern AI can only work with the one on the right. The same thing happens here. If we get cameras that are not quite up to spec and basically are doing extremely high compression in order to save bandwidth or in order to save storage, then you end up with compression artifacts where, again, a security officer could probably identify the person on the right, but AI could never do that. When you have frame rate, there's we actually have a company here in Arizona, where I'm located in the United States, where they've decided to put all their cameras to save storage at 7 to 10 frames per second. The problem that you have is that when someone's walking, that's not a problem. When someone's running, they're out of the frame usually within 1 second. And so you can't identify who that person is because they move through the frame of the camera too quick. And then we have scene complexity. Here's a school hallway. And when I'm looking at a school, what modern cameras do today is that they only transmit what are called keyframes. So even if it's 30 frames a second, in order to save on bandwidth, they'll generate one keyframe, and then the software basically fills in the rest for the other 29 frames. And if in fact people are moving, then you get the full 30 frames. And that saves on storage because we're not having to store all 30 frames a second. We only have to save the keyframe for the once a second. Now, what's interesting about this is that the amount of data that it generates obviously is less, but people confuse this a lot by saying, oh, you're talking about motion detection. No, I'm not. This is not motion detection. That's completely different. That's where the camera is completely turned off until it detects motion and then it turns on. This is, the camera is on all the time. I am just not, the camera is not transmitting because there's nothing occurring in the camera. It can send a still picture, if you will, until something occurs. This is a sizing tool that the industry uses. And when you start to look at, say, what is the storage requirement for 100 cameras of 1080p on 15 days and 10, 20, and 30 frames per second, you can see how much storage changes just by changing the frames per second. If I do 10 frames per second, it's 32 terabytes. If I do 20, it's 64. If I do 30, it's 96. And if I do 30 frames per second and then change the retention to 30 days, it becomes 193. Every time you change something, storage changes. You need your storage to grow with you because you don't want to violate the second rule, which is I want to be fault tolerant and I want to be up all the time in order to protect people and property. So what's the market basically for video surveillance? I mean, a lot of you probably already understand exactly where you're at and what you're looking at, but you may not realize everything that's out there. Currently, of course, any government agency, any school, any police, any jail or detention facility, water and power companies. We have one in Arizona where they're protecting the power across the entire storage grid and the generation in the entire state of Arizona. And they've got about 7,000 cameras doing that today. We have one in Auckland, New Zealand, running Qumulo HPE hardware and Qumulo storage, where they're put 2 cameras on every bus running through Auckland, New Zealand. And there are about 6,000 cameras right now. Airports, sports venues, casinos, malls, etc. One of the things I find very interesting about sports venues is that more and more AI techniques are being used in order to look at people movement. And this is all occurring through the software. So when you look at the picture on the bottom, you see a very large sports venue with what everyone in the world calls football and Americans call soccer. And you actually see that you know, we've got certain gates or entries or exits where we want to try to get people to move through. But what if you have an emergency and you have to get people to move correctly through there? You actually look at trends of how people move in a venue, and this would cause you to build more modern sports arenas, or more importantly, in an existing sports arena, you could put up boards saying, you know, we have an emergency, row so-and-so move through here, row so-and-so move through here. Or when you have a break and you want to go take a, you know, you want to go get something, eat or drink, you could actually look at the movement of people and you can say, you know, €1 off if you move through this facility, if you move through this gate and go to this, you know, refreshment stand, because you're trying to force people to move in certain directions. And that's all AI techniques, again, for protection of people. One of the ones that I find probably the most interesting that I've been involved in is this factory of the future. This is a picture of a battery manufacturer in Sparks, Nevada. Some of you know them. We can't use their name, but you can tell pretty much by the building. They manufacture 5.5 million batteries a day for electric vehicles. And the problem is that they need to keep information for 18 years for various government agencies, because if one of those cars ever crashes and they identify that the batteries were at fault, they need to go look at the manufacturing of how those batteries were manufactured and any pictures that occur. So they're actually using video surveillance not to look at people or to protect property, it's to look at the compliance of how the things are being made. So along their automated assembly lines, they'll have 20 to 30 cameras along every line. And as the battery moves by in extremely high speed, they're taking 4K pictures, and then they're comparing them to known good parts. And if anything happens, they can stop the line automatically, and they can send people out to recalibrate the line. And this is all done through video surveillance with AI techniques, even though they're not looking at people or property. I find this extremely fascinating, is how to get factory control or better factory control, manufacturing control, by using video surveillance and using AI. So what is the opportunity in the video surveillance market? Well, I put these from dollars into euros probably several months ago for another presentation that I did. The market is expected to grow to 63 billion euros by the year 2023, and storage will be growing to 5.5 billion euros. There's been, in 2018, the last time that they really did a study on this, there were sales in 1 year alone of over 130 million high definition cameras, and the retention time and the definition is changing every year. The average sale for a medium site is 1 petabyte. My average sale here, and I've sold probably about 30 of them in the last 2 years in the southwest of the United States, is about 2 petabytes. And I know that Barat, who's on the line, has assisted with sales in Turkey and Egypt and in other places. I know that some of his sales greatly exceed 1 petabyte. And the AI analytics area can grow to more than 2.5 billion by 2023. So I'll just talk a little bit about the architecture. Here's the problem that basically that we have. So if you look at video surveillance, we have cameras at the bottom going into what is known as recording servers, and you have multiple recording servers based upon the number of cameras. On average, you have anywhere from 50 to 200 to 300 cameras per recording server, depending upon, again, the resolution of the cameras. And then you have management servers, SQL servers, and analytics servers. And then you also have walls that your security officers can look at. Now, the problem is that poor storage and poor storage decisions mean that you will have video surveillance failures. Let's go back to this picture with the architecture. If I record everything to local disk on every recording server, the problem that I have is that I need lots of administration, and people are extremely expensive, because what's happening now is I have sized this specifically to the amount of cameras talking to each recording server, and I've sized it for the correct megapixel or resolution of the camera with the correct number of frames per second, with the correct number of retention, and I can't change anything in the environment. And I certainly can't change anything in the environment if I need to go and keep everything up, because I couldn't fail over by changing the cameras, because my failover recording servers are not large enough to change anything, because they're sized usually the same size as the recording server. What a lot of companies have done is they've said, well, we're going to go to a scale up storage platform. Think of this like a network appliance, some other Dells. There are different types of scale up. That's where you have dual controllers and you hang groups of disks below them. Again, The biggest problem that you have here is that it's extremely expensive because most of these solutions size to about 100 terabytes per volume. So that means that you have got administrators who are creating in a petabyte solution 10 volumes. And I've got my recording servers writing, and I'm saying to the recording servers, well, you write to volume number 1. And a second recording server, you write to volume number 2. And again, I will submit to you, these are all sized based upon the cameras below. So if anything changes in that environment, I not only have to go and change my storage, I probably have to take down my video surveillance to do it. Again, violating the rule of fault tolerance and protecting people. This is a much more inexpensive solution, but again, it's one that's high in people costs, high in administration, and it also has the added distinction of being very slow on drive failures to rebuild. OS upgrades typically take 30 minutes or longer, which means you incur long downtimes to your video surveillance, and there's no analytics. What if something changes in the bottom and I want to know how much has my storage grown over the last month based upon certain cameras? I can't tell you. So we're offering the combination of HPE and Qumulo is offering a new paradigm here. We're basically, what we're doing is we're talking about scale across distributed file system where we have a cluster starting with a minimum of 4 nodes, and the data is spread evenly across all the nodes so that we can have not only high performance, but we can also have high fault tolerance so that I can lose multiple disk drives. Depending upon the size of the cluster, I can lose 1 to 4 nodes all simultaneously. And this is all done using a technique called erasure coding, which provides a much better failure domain than RAID does. We don't do a RAID 4, 5, or 6. We do erasure coding, which allows us to fail. In some of the HPE nodes, we'll have 28 disk drives. And if we lose 2 nodes simultaneously, that's 56 drives are completely lost, but the system is still running. No RAID system does that today. So what does it look like in the environment? What it looks like is this, where you put a HPE Qumulo cluster in there. You have 1 volume and 1 mount point. So that means now that if something changes at the bottom with the cameras, I don't have to change anything from an administration point of view. It all still goes to the 1 volume. And at that point, if things start to fill up with storage, I just keep adding nodes. And I do this on the fly so that the load balancing is automatic, the shifting of data is automatic, and I have never violated the first rule, which is do not bring down the system. We can do an OS upgrade typically in anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds of the entire cluster. So this provides complete fault tolerance, and I can do complete analytics on the system. How much storage is being used per camera? What is the performance per camera? When is the cluster going to fill up, and when do I need to add more storage? All questions that are answered with the HPE Qumulo brand. So this is pretty much what it would look like if I was out in an environment. This is a university in the United States that actually is running HPE Qumulo. You can see in the lower left, there's a campus building where there's a recording server, and they're transmitting. All cameras work at 1 gigabit, by the way. So you have a network of 1 gigabit going to your recording server, which sits on a 10 gigabit network. Then you have your management and SQL servers. You may have another campus building. You may have the security police in a completely different building, and then your main data center. So what it looks like is from the main data center, I can write direct to the Qumulo storage. I don't need to do anything else. Whereas in a campus building, maybe what you want to do for fault tolerance reasons, because you may have network outages, is you record from the cameras into the recording server for say 1 hour. And then at that 1 hour, you push and aggregate everything into the Qumulo. So this way, what happens is if the security officer below says, oh, I want to look at that video from 3 hours ago, what happens is the management server says, oh, I know where that video is. It tells the recording server to go to the Qumulo to get it and to display it on the smart wall. And so you'll never see it, anything in terms of a performance difference. You see the video as if it was live, and you never knew that it came from this aggregated pool of storage. If in fact you're looking at video that was 15 minutes ago, well, then it would come from that little bit of local disk that's on the recording server. So let me just pause right here and give you a quick demonstration. This is the Qumulo. This is the landing page for the cluster itself. I'm just going to show you right here. It's out retrieving the hardware, probing the health of the hardware right now, and it will come up and tell me that I have 4 nodes right here, HPE ProLiant. These are 1U machines. Now, last week, some of you may have been involved in this. There was HPE Discover. And so this cluster was up doing a high performance demonstration. This is an all flash cluster. It's 100% NVMe. There's no spinning disk on here. Typically, you would not do this for video surveillance. In video surveillance, you would probably use a hybrid cluster where it would have some amount of NVMe or SSD in the front, and then a lot of spinning disk on every node. And we have that in our portfolio between HPE and Qumulo. We have different models that do that. I did this because I wanted to use the same cluster for both demonstrations in HPE Discover and now for you. And this cluster was doing 16 gigabytes per second of throughput last week for a demonstration for the movie industry. Each node can do about 4 gigabytes per second of throughput. Right now, you're going to see we're doing quite a bit less than that because video surveillance doesn't require that level of performance. Hence why you can still be fault tolerant using a hybrid storage platform. But just looking at some of the analytics, if you will, this page is a summary of the analytics. You can see I'm 63% full, composed of data, metadata, how much I'm storing for snapshots to protect the data, and then how much is available. My 4 nodes, how many files and directories are in there, and how much is it growing. I'm looking at a summary, if you will, over the last 24 hours of the performance of IOPS throughput and latency, and I can move to any point in time in that 24 hours and move the slider down below, shrink it, grow it, and look at what the performance is by looking at the numbers on the right side. So you see, I was writing at about 475 megabytes per second, reading at 22 megabytes per second. I can come down and look at the distribution over the 24 hours of what is the current performance. This is the dashed lines. Right now, I'm not doing any aggregation of the video surveillance into the storage. It's ready to that 1 hour. And then every 15 minutes, I'm actually taking, I've got 4 machines doing video surveillance. I'll show you in a second. Every 15 minutes, one of those machines is sending its data to the Qumulo. So I'm spreading it out over an hour. What is the load on the cluster using client activity? What is the most active clients? And down at the bottom, how is the storage growing in the last 72 hours? Is the data is growing, the metadata, and which directories were growing and by how much? And you can see I created a separate directory for each video surveillance recording server. So I have recording server 4, 1, 3, and 2, and you can see by how much they grew. You can see the carrots going up, so it's growth. I'll go into more detailed analytics in a second. Let me show you the video surveillance. I'm actually running Milestone software, and Milestone probably owns about 52% of the entire market for video surveillance. Genetec owns probably about 43% of that market. So between them, they're a little over 90%. And then there's probably 24 other companies that control the other 8 or 9%. So these 2 companies control the majority of the video surveillance market, and for good reason. You can see I've got different things that you can do in tasks. This is the management server. and I've got 4 video surveillance recording servers here. Each recording server is running 75 cameras. And you can see if I click on another one, you'll see the cameras. Okay. Each one's running 75 cameras. And the first thing you're going to say is those pictures kind of look the same. Well, I don't have 300 cameras sitting in my lab. What I'm doing is I'm using what's called in the industry a camera simulator. It's a separate computer that literally looks like a video surveillance camera, and the Milestone software thinks it's getting feeds from the video surveillance cameras. So the software for Milestone doesn't change at all. This is just a separate machine that's generating the video. So you'll see that here in this case, I'm recording to a 200 gigabyte disk. And then basically what I'm saying is that if I were to click this, I only want to keep it for 1 hour. And then at the 1 hour mark, I basically say, I want to send it off to the Qumulo using Microsoft SMB protocol. And I want to keep it for 7 days, and I want it to be 15 terabytes. If I want to change that now, I could make it 20 terabytes, right? Now, I don't do anything on the Qumulo at all because it's one volume. If I were to do that on, say, a NetApp or a Dell or on local storage, I'd have to make sure I had that storage. I couldn't just make that change. And that would require downtime in my video surveillance, where I would have to come here and I would have to disable the video surveillance feeds from the cameras and unenable them or disable them so that I could actually go and make those changes, which would violate the protection of people and property. This now allows me to grow, and you can see I'm going to grow to 20 terabytes, and I haven't done anything to the storage. I haven't changed it at all because it's one volume, one global namespace, and I have got 28 terabytes available, and I just changed it by 5, doesn't matter, right? If this was near full and I did that, then I would have to go and add another volume onto the system. Not another volume, I'm sorry, another node in the cluster so that this cluster could grow, and then I would be able to do that. Now, in video surveillance, if I was the security officer, you would see this, where you would actually see the camera feeds from, in this case, 6 cameras, and I'm in a live mode right now. If I went into playback mode, I could basically say, pick a time period, and let's say that I wanted it from the 23rd to the 24th, and I wanted to look at a whole day's worth, and then I said play. Well, now look, it's just as fast as it's coming from the camera, but it's not coming from local storage. It's coming from the Qumulo. And the way I can tell is that I can see the throughput right there for the reads. And now if I go into detailed analytics, I can look at every client and I can see the throughput of every client. And if I open them up, I can see every file that they're reading and writing in the throughput of every file. So now I know exactly where I'm getting my data, what the performance is from the client. I can look at the hot spots so I can see exactly what's hot in the storage, where this is a directory for video surveillance 1. And if I rest my cursor, I get a pop-up. This is the file themselves. So directories always point to files. Files are the things that have the hot spots, if you will. I can go and look at trending, where I can look at the data over a period of time and how much has it grown or shrunk. And I can do that by hour, by day, by week. And so I can look at the per day. Now you'll notice I can't tell you how the trend is working because this cluster's only been up since HPE Discover, basically about 6 days. But in 72 hours, I can show you the trend because I've covered all 72 hours. And what's interesting here is if I want to know what's caused this change, I can click any bar, come down to the bottom and see exactly what's caused the change and by how much. So I can see the growth over that period of time from any recording server. So if I change any camera, I can see how the storage will continue to grow, and I can start to make assessments on how fast this storage will fill up over that period of time. So we've got about another 15 minutes. I'm going to jump back into the presentation, let Scott wrap up, and then we can have you ask any questions. Scott? You're on mute, sir.
I see that. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks for that fantastic overview. I think, you know, just to look at the growth of the market in general, you know, to see the need that's growing. I think 20% compound annual growth, down to the growing number of cameras, the need for increased length of retention, and like you touched on there as well, Michael, the increasing resolution demand as well on the files. So everything.
And more places are doing AI because they want to be able to look at trends of what's occurring. The city of Denver in Colorado has 30,000 cameras. And I know London, for instance, has about 30 to 35,000 cameras protecting their people, where they're now using modern AI techniques to determine if I see someone on a corner and they've committed a robbery, and they cause particular harm, we can track them, and then we can zero the police in on them wherever they move through. And that's all done through AI rather than getting groups of people to go and look at that.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting there, and how we show how Greenlake really helps in there as well, is around that whole idea of, you know, the performance being so critical that a lot of organizations that have a need for this want to keep that on-prem, but at the same time there's challenges around that in terms of, you know, if we're in a situation where there's such rapid growth, the challenges around capacity management, around cost management, you know, and around just in general managing that whole infrastructure can become quite taxing. And I think what we've shown there as well is some real insights that come from the Qumulo tool set, with the real-time analytics interface that you have. And what complements that really well is Greenlake Central, which is a cloud native console that HPE have, and it goes to every HPE Greenlake with Qumulo customer. And it allows you to really monitor cost, and not just in your Greenlake cloud, but also across your public cloud instances as well. So we can open that up to monitor cost and utilization for your Azure, GCP, AWS public clouds as well, because we understand that as well as there being a challenge of getting that cloud-like experience, there's also the challenge that having a multi-cloud distributed cloud environment makes complexity come into play, and actually, you know, the demand for a vast array of different skills in order to manage a multi-public cloud environment and on-premise cloud. So Greenlake Central really provides that line of sight into your entire IT environment, regardless of where it is. And also behind that, we use, particularly for the Greenlake cloud element of it, we have a utility delivery manager aligned to every HPE Greenlake with Qumulo customer. And the utility delivery manager is monitoring the capacity that's required, and we'll look to work with our customers to ensure that you have the capacity you need today, ready and up and running today. And we do that by, of course, you know, I talked earlier about eliminating the need for over provisioning. There is an over provision within the Greenlake cloud model because there has to be infrastructure there in order to do it. The difference is there's no risk on the customer of that over provision because HPE takes that risk on. So we'll install a little bit of what we call buffer, additional capacity that you don't need to use today, and allow you to grow into that while monitoring the need for additional capacity as we go. And Greenlake Central goes way beyond those functions. I don't want to go into an in-depth Greenlake Central session at the moment, but but we have continuous compliance functionality that we've built in there, and GreenLake Private Cloud, and you can enable VMs and containers straight from there. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the mechanics of how a GreenLake with Qumulo deal might look for a customer. So I've modeled up an example here to show you really how this would work. So let's say a customer has a requirement for around 180 terabytes on day one. So talking about the building of on the HPE Apollo platform that Michael touched on earlier, we can go to a minimum quantity of 4 nodes. So let's say in that minimum quantity of 4 nodes, we use the 90 terabyte nodes to get to a raw capacity of 360 terabytes. We use the Erasure coding that Michael talked about to bring us down to a usable capacity of 200, and that gives us our usable capacity, and that's what GreenLake is built on. We can build that on a per gigabyte or a per terabyte basis. Per gigabyte gives you that level of granularity to get really small and know that you're not paying for each terabyte as you get in there. You're paying for that gigabyte level, very, very small level of granularity, which gives great insight to our customers. So if we look at this example, the customer needs 180 terabytes or 180,000 gigabytes roughly on day one. We install the 200, but we allow that reserve to be in there. So like you would expect in any public cloud provider, there's a reserve capacity, a level that you can flex down to. And we would usually, I mean, it's case by case, but in this example, I've gone with 80% because it's around the number that we typically work with customers at. So 80% reserve capacity would mean that on a monthly basis, there's a commitment to pay for 145 terabytes, 145,000 gigabytes of usable capacity, with the ability to flex right up to the 200. And of course, we'll monitor that. I talked about the utility delivery manager. When we get to around that 90, 95% trigger point, depending on your growth trajectory, we'll look at what the right point in time is to have the conversation about adding additional capacity. And that allows us to give you the capacity that you need each time with just a simple change order. So smoothing out the supply chain issues and procurement processes as well. So real time saver there. And talking about those time savers, if we move to the next slide, we can, oh, sorry, yes, before I talk about the time savings, I was going to show this model. The numbers are illustrative only, so please don't read anything into them either way, but to show you the modeling of how this works. So using that same example that I talked about on the last slide, with this start reserve capacity of 145 terabytes, 145,000 gigabytes, and we have a projection with that customer that actually over the next few years, we're going to see some growth here. No commitment to that growth, but to model it out on how that might look. We think by 5 years' time, we'll be at around 600 terabytes in terms of that requirement. So we'll put a banding in place that says, okay, between your utilization of up to 200 terabytes, we'll charge 99 cents. And then when you go above that, we'll move that down to 93 cents and so on. So by the end of the contract, you're going to be in a place where you're paying, in this example, 23, 24% less per gigabyte than you were at the beginning of the contract. You can see that illustrated here in the graphical representation at the bottom. So your start capacity is in one point, your end capacity in 5 years' time will have seen a natural growth. Now, I challenge you to tell me the contract where you can go in on day one and see a commitment from the supplier that in 5 years' time, even though we're stacking on new technology on top of that, we're going to be able to offer a decreasing cost per unit of measure as you go through that 5-year term. And we're seeing real benefits from that for our customers. If we move to the next slide, I can touch on some of that. We've been running this now for around 12 years. I talked about that, harking back to the very beginning of the presentation. We talked about it's 12 years that there's been this flexibility with cloud-like models. Maybe been a little bit longer than that, but you know, last 12 years is where we've seen the real growth there. And HPE's been in it since the beginning. We started off with a model called flexible capacity, and we made some pretty savvy acquisitions and some developments of our own software and different capabilities to allow us to service capabilities as well, to allow us to develop to what became Greenlake about 4 years ago, and that continues to develop with a whole raft of new announcements in this year's Discover, as well as, of course, you know, some of the breadth and depth that partners, very much like Qumulo being a key partner for us, help us expand our capabilities into areas like this video surveillance storage. We've got $4.8 billion under contract now, and over 1,200 customers globally. And we're operating with, actually, that's slightly out of date, 900 partners are selling this as well. And the reason we're seeing this success and this growth, we recorded over 40% growth last quarter, year on year from the previous year. We had a customer retention rate of 95%, and Qumulo really adds to our ability to retain customers, because we touched on it earlier. The Qumulo service is absolutely fantastic, and that comes as part of the Greenlake service, and we have, you know, our highest level of service attached to HPE Greenlake offers also as standard. So if we move forward, we can see the results that our customers see from this, which is around these key areas of time, risk, cost, and control and insight. So time, risk, and cost all intrinsically linked there. And that control and insight is helped even more with the level of insight that Qumulo bring to the table here. But from a time perspective, if you think about classic HP or the traditional purchase model, these statistics came from a paper that we had written by Forrester Consulting, who got these numbers by going and speaking to HPE Greenlake customers who've been with us, some for in their first generation, some second generation customers in their second contract and third contract even. And they said, look, what are you seeing as the benefits of this? This isn't our marketing information. This isn't us saying, you know, we reckon we can save you this amount of cost based on some modeling we've done internally. This is what our real life customers are seeing. A 75% shorter time to deploy digital projects is what we see. That means that people can bring products to market quicker. It means that they can expand their capabilities around video surveillance quicker and get new cameras and new cameras online faster, with the ability to archive and have active storage that they need in order to do the analysis that they may want to do on that. And of course, that managed for you piece gives us the 85% less unplanned downtime, because it's HPE and Qumulo that are taking care of that for you. And of course, that over provisioning piece, I said 30%. Well, our customers are actually saying it's 30 to 40% savings on TCO from the elimination of the need for over provisioning. And the control and insight is obviously key. We've talked about that in depth with the real-time analytics and Greenlake Central as well, allowing IT teams to be more productive. So that's the main topics that I wanted to cover today. I really want to thank Michael for the great insights into video surveillance and the market and really some of the challenges that customers face in that area. And I think that, you know, we've tied together how Greenlake and Qumulo work together to deliver a solution that's economically viable and operationally efficient for customers there.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions at all? Anna and Bharat have been answering questions in the Q&A, but I just wanted to see if there's anything else for Scott or myself before we continue. Yes,
We have one from Richard Kenyon. Indeed, Bharat was very great to send a link on architecture, but we'd like to ask you, have you had an experience of working with or any or have deployed with ONSSI, which is the Ocularis, into their VSS solution?
No, I will say I have not. As I said, there are two main players in this space, and there's probably 24 players that consume the other 9%. And we've got Panasonic, Avigilon, Bosch. The names just go on and on in terms of other players. And I see them occasionally. I've worked with some Avigilon, I've worked with some Panasonic, I've done some Honeywell, I've done a Bosch. There's a number of other installations I've done. I probably in the last 3 years, no joke, been involved with installations of video surveillance. I'm a certified video surveillance expert in both Milestone and Genetec, but worked on some of the other ones. I've probably been involved with over 100,000 cameras over the last 2 years in getting them installed and on Qumulo storage. Like I said, it's always something new, and I'd be glad to look at anything and look at the requirements and see if they'll work with the HPE Qumulo solution. So please bring it to our attention, and thank you for the question. Is there anything else? All right, Anna, back over to you then.
Well, partners, HPE colleagues, and Qumulo colleagues, thank you very, very much for attending our webinar. We are here for you. You know, I believe that we will be sending a follow-up based upon the registered list. So you will have a copy of this recording along with the contact information, our contact information. So once again, and we thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mike, our experts from HPE Greenlake, as well as from our own resident Qumulo VSS expert. Have a wonderful morning and evening to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.